Welcome to Simply Caroline, a podcast dedicated to women empowerment where we will discuss a bunch of different subjects such as life, parenting, love, business, money, relationships, healing, recovery, addiction, entrepreneurship, and so much more. A podcast I'll do my best to keep simple, fun, and relatable and bring you tools to help you better your life. So thank you for being here. And here's your host, myself, Caroline Blanchard. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Thank you for being with us again this week. So I have a really cool subject this week, one we haven't touched at all yet. And we have Selena Willows to talk to us about swimming safety. How are you, Selena?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Happy to have you on the podcast. So yeah, first time we touched this subject, but I don't know why, because it's such an important subject. So let's dive in right away. Selena, what is it that you do?
Thanks, Carolyn. I'm so glad to be here. So what I do really is I empower parents to take charge of their own family's water safety and to learn what they need to know in order to make sure that they can keep their children as safe as possible, right? Putting that power into parents' hands, I firmly believe, is how we keep our children safe because we are the first line of defense. We are the ones who are there. And so I teach parents how to take care of that and how to teach their own children to swim and self-rescue. So they are fully aware of their children's capabilities in every setting. And yeah, and it's so fulfilling. I really love what I do.
Awesome. And you know what? I'm listening to you, and I have 3 kids, but they're grown up right now, like now. But I remember that was one of my priorities when they were young. For some reason, not I don't even have a pool, but it was for them to know how to swim. So they were literally in swimming classes at 1. But I have to say, especially when you go in with a baby who is 1, you feel pretty vulnerable because you're like, oh my gosh, if I drop the baby, it's done. It's gonna drown. It's just like it's something that we do so naturally, go swim. Well, anyway, for me, but to have a baby in your hands in the water, it's a whole different things. And I'm not saying just holding it, I'm saying like trying to teach them. So how do you go through that phase of like, because it's a different psychology?
Yes, it absolutely is. So one of the things that I do very differently than you would see at most traditional schools, and what you probably went through with your children, is that is it I teach it as a body skill, right? So we allow the children to explore the water rather than dictating what needs to be done. When a child learns to walk or run or even ride a bike, we're not giving explicit instruction. We don't say, put your left foot here. Great. Now tilt your weight, lean over, and put your right foot here, right? And for some reason, traditional swimming lessons, that's how it's taught. And it takes away the instinct, right? We all, as parents, we have this wonderful instinct, this gut feeling that can tell us when something is right or wrong. And we know this, right? And I think that there is no place more that we feel this instinct and this intuition as when we have children, right? And so we can take that intuition into the water with us and know when our child is okay and when they're not. And I mean, there are all kinds of things that I teach parents what to look for, and how to determine and how to trust that instinct. But that's the start of it is making sure that the parents have a really good base of knowledge and then teaching them to really trust themselves, because ultimately we know when our children are okay and when they're not.
Yeah, and I love what you just said there. Like, you just made me realize one thing is that by not dictating what they have to do, you're teaching them how to use their instinct. And it's absolutely true what you said, because like I did the typical ones, like, twice a week for half an hour, one monitor for, I don't know, like 5 kids, and one after the other, they all do the same thing. But it does remove the instinct in it. And, God forbid if an accident happened, that's really what you want your child to have, is the instinct to get out of there. because I assume, never happened to me, but when something happens, you're not thinking about skills.
Absolutely not. Nobody is thinking when you get into that place of panic in the water, um, instinct takes over. Now, unfortunately, as mammals, our instincts in the water when we are in that panic situation don't help us. But everything leading up to that can be incredibly beneficial. And so the instinct is both for mom and for the child, right? The children learn their own limits, their own abilities, how far they can push themselves before they get really uncomfortable, before it gets scary, before it. And by equipping the parents with the tools to recognize when that is happening, then the parents feel a lot more secure. And equipping the children with that self-awareness and self-realization, um, I mean, it's incredible how much safer a child can be. There are studies out there that said that just teaching a child to swim can reduce risks of drowning up to 88%. Now
Wow.
imagine if we not only knew how to swim, logically and physically, but then also involved our instincts in that, and a child will look at a distance and say, you know what, that's too far for me, rather than being held back by a parent all the time saying that's too far for you, and the child doesn't grow, and the second mom's not there, the child's going to try it anyway.
You're right on that. Oh gosh. Especially my second one. It's like anything that I would say no, she would go test it. you know.
Yep.
Or yeah, and unfortunately it took me years to understand that I had to go reverse. So
Yeah.
excuse me. But the other thing that I wanted to ask, and it may be a bizarre question, but you know how kids have this, kids and teenagers, they have this feeling of being invincible. How do you cope with that when they're babies? Because they don't realize the danger, or, that something fatal can happen. So, how do you teach that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So what's wonderful is that the age at which I teach, so I teach children as of about 18 months. So we take them really, really young. And so at that age, they don't have the physical ability to lift their head and maintain a swimming position. So they
Hmm.
can't actually grab a breath of air unless they learn to roll over. Now, in traditional lessons, you would have learned this, right? Is that one of the first things they teach is how to float on their back. Now, that in a vacuum on its own, not very helpful, because if the child can't get to or from their back, then what good is it, right? But the reason they teach that is so that they have this kind of ease and complacency in the water, and it makes it a lot easier for everything else to be learned. By taking that away and taking away the child's ability to take a breath while they're swimming, we actually use their body cues and their body language to let us know when it's time to step in. And so by doing that, we have incredible control about over what's happening, not just in their body, but in their brain too. And we can actually see when a child starts to get a little bit worried and their brain starts to tap into that fight or flight or freeze and go, I'm going to need some air soon. We can see it. And so because we can see it, we know exactly when to jump in, and we can teach a child just like you would teach someone who's having a panic attack to like breathe and calm down. You can teach a child to keep pushing through, even though it's getting difficult, and delay that panic. And by doing it this way, because they don't have access to air, we are their only access to air in the water while they do it. We actually train them to learn their own limits. Because if we say, you're going to swim to me all this way, and they just did a swim and that was too hard, they're going to tell you right away, that's too far for me. I'm not comfortable with that. And so we're teaching them right from the beginning that it can be quite uncomfortable if you're in a sticky situation. And so by learning that right from the start, we can then build on that and help them grow their limits rather than restricting once they know how to swim.
I like that. Yes, yes. So grow their limits, and that's so well said, and could apply to a lot of adults as well.
And a
Growing
lot of
their limits of
contexts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But Selena, tell me a little bit, like, how did you come to decide, okay, I'm going to teach people, because I know a bit your background and you didn't start out this way.
Yeah.
So what happened? Tell us like a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I started coaching gymnastics actually when I was 14. My sister was a gymnast and it was a job, right? And they were ready to hire me at 14 and I was ready to get some money. So I jumped into this job, and at the time I had no idea that this was going to lead to something so phenomenal. But I started coaching, and then when I was about 15, 16, I started teaching swimming lessons as well. I had gone through the Red Cross program all the way to the end. So long as there was another course, I was taking it. So I had these two jobs where I was working with children in a very intimate setting and through a lot of fear. In the gymnastics, I ended up coaching competitively as well.
Mm,
And so what happens in these scenarios is that children, especially in the gym, children will do a skill that they have to learn or something like that. And a lot of these movements are scary, right? I mean, we've seen gymnasts flip around. Getting to a point where you can do that can be really, really scary. And um, I ended up being that coach that get called in to help figure out why a child wasn't moving a certain way or rotating fully or this and that. And I had this gift where not only could I see where the problem was happening in the movement, but I was able to break it down with the child. So I was
mm,
able to sit with the child and say, like, how come you're not, like, that your hand goes this way. So how come it's not happening? And at the time, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea what I was creating, but I was holding a safe space for these children without any feelings of my own as to the outcome. I had no stake in it whatsoever. It didn't matter to me whether or not this child accomplished it or not, because I was getting paid either way. And at 16, I didn't, the gymnast wasn't my, top priority. My money in the bank account was. And so I would talk it out with the child. And I did it more in the gym than I did in the water because, as there's 5 children in the water and it's chaos and this and that. But what it eventually led me to was that when my son was about 18 months old, he had a non-fatal drowning incident where he was in the lake and he was being watched by somebody else. And there's absolutely no blame, no fault. It happens in an instant. It could happen to anyone. This is somebody who was very well versed in watching children, and I wasn't present. And so he took a step backwards in the lake and he fell, and
mm,
he wasn't able to stand up, and he was under the water for a while, and he got scared. And physically he is totally fine, was totally fine, very, very lucky. But he did develop post-traumatic stress disorder from it. He had night terrors. He was bath time became a nightmare. Anytime there was water involved in anything, there was tantrums and screaming and all this. And at 18 months, we don't really have the communication skills to really, you know, talk about it. Now, I obviously knew what had happened because I was informed. But as someone who loves the water, and I needed him to swim. This was my little water baby. We used to go swimming together. We would take our baths together, and it was painful. And so I knew I needed to find a way to fix it. Um, and so we started exploring and started getting in the water and doing it. And it took a lot of time. And I can't say as I did all of the work with my son myself. That would be disingenuous. We did have help. And what I realized with this outside help was that he removed himself from the outcome.
mm,
And he was doing all the things that I was doing in the gym. Well, not all of them. Some of the things I was doing in the gym. But the big key was the removal from the outcome. When I was working with my son, the outcome was so important to me that I was interfering. Um, and so once I realized that if I separate myself from the outcome and really truly make it the child's journey and not mine, the space that I create to get through their fears and get through all of that creates a safety for the child where they are then able to step through the fear and try the thing. Um,
But
So
I get what you're saying, you know, when you say remove yourself from the situation, oh my goodness, it must be hard as a mother. Because I think that with other kids, you are concerned, but you know, more able to remove yourself. I know that with my kids in any situation, there's I can't distance myself. They actually are all old enough now to tell me. But yeah, it must be so difficult, and I'm glad that your little boy is okay. And unfortunately, you know, drowning is a tragedy that happens. You know, I just want to come back to that because you said no fault to the person. It just takes a second of not watching. And you know, I've had people that I know have those, you know, barbecue parties in the backyard, and there's like tons of adults and tons of people and kids drowning because of a moment or assuming everyone else is watching them. So, you know, water safety is so important. And, you know, even if you go boating or whatever, life vests, I know they don't look cool on teenagers, but they can save, you know. So talk a bit about that too, like in moments like that, and in situations or events that would be more at risk. How does all of this help?
yeah. So one of the things that in my program we teach a child is how to get back to the side and how to get to safety if they've fallen in. Now, this helps in a scenario where a child has fallen in the pool, right? If a child is playing with their friends and then all of a sudden gets into a sticky situation, then there's a whole other, you know, that's a whole other thing. And we can talk about, you know, I'll come back around to how the adults should be managing the situation or how best to manage the situation from the adult perspective. But for the child, most of the accidents that we see are a child falls in, or um, when you have one of these parties and all the toddlers are on the steps on the stairs because that's where they can reach, and they're all hanging out there, and inevitably one gets shoved or pushed or whatever or slips off the step, and all of a sudden they're in water that they can't reach. Well, the importance of teaching a child to turn around and go back, right? And so again, to come back to these traditional lessons, that's something they don't teach. They're so focused on strokes and forward motion. But what about the ability to turn around? What about the ability to navigate in the water and go towards safety if need be, right? So that's a core part of the program. Now,
Yeah, sorry,
yeah,
I'm just so cutting you now and rude. Because it just came to me, and that's my ADD. But it's also, I guess, that you are creating neural pathways of being calmer in the water and more comfortable.
yes, absolutely. So this work that we do where we help the child learn to stay calm and just keep pushing through the discomfort is a big part of that, right? We're buying them time. The practice that I do with the that I teach the parents and that I do with the children, I call it stretchy swims. And so basically what we're doing is we're stretching the amount of time that the child can be uncomfortable in the water before panic hits, right? Now we're watching for all kinds of things, so it is quite safe. But that stretch that we're doing is going to buy them time. Just like when you feel a panic attack coming on, you can go, wait, I've got this. Oh, no, we don't encourage them to breathe because breathing underwater doesn't work. But we have other things that we do, you know, and that can certainly make a huge difference for a child in just at what point that panic sets in, right? If they have a few more seconds to get to the wall, a few more seconds for a parent to notice, a few more seconds for a sibling or a friend to yell, something, you know, a little more time. Um, and as far as, you know, the barbecues and the parties and this and that, I highly, highly recommend that when people are having parties and barbecues and they're opening up their pool, one of two things: hire lifeguards. Absolutely, hire lifeguards. There are plenty of companies. They're a little bit hard to find in Canada. In the States, they're all over the place. There are companies everywhere that will hire out lifeguards for your party. Okay. And if you're having trouble finding, feel free to reach out. I will help because I think it's really important. But the other thing that you can do, if that's out of your ability, out of your, you know, for whatever reason, is designate a water watcher. designate a parent, have a schedule that says from this time to this time, you are in charge, but then don't stop there. Have a button, a hat, a scarf, a something to remind not only the person who's doing it, but everybody else who is in charge right now of watching the water, who is in charge, and that can go a long way. Everybody takes turns,
I
and
love
it,
that.
okay. Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that because, and yes, it's maybe not as fun for the person who's on watch, but it's so crucial because I know I've been to parties like that, and then you start, even if you're watching your child and there's someone who comes and you don't want to be rude, so you start talking with them, so inevitably you turn your
Yeah.
eyes here and there, and you're watching your child, you're not watching in general. So I love the idea of like designate someone and
Yeah.
give them a sign,
Yeah.
like you said, a scarf, anything to say it's you that is in charge.
Yeah.
And it's so worth it. It's lives that we're talking about. I want to go back to one thing because the overprotective mom in me was like, when you say push your limits, I was thinking, I started almost hyperventilating as you said that, because if I would see my child in the water, starting to struggle, I would probably dive. So how do you manage the parents in these situations?
Yeah, so it's twofold. The first thing is that before parents start with me or start in the program where they're teaching their own children, there's a lot of conversation that happens around how this is going to work. Now, when I'm in the water, the parents know you sit and you're quiet and you let me do my thing. I'm a professional. I've been doing this for years. I'm an expert. I got it. If I need your help, I will ask. So that's part of it. But anytime there's a situation where I feel, and this is a practice that I do with some of the older children who might panic in deeper water or something, is we will get them good and tired, and we will get them to a place where they are starting to worry, where we haven't switched into panic, because once you get into that panic, there's no communication available. But right before that point, where we'll get them into that point where they are calling for help and asking for help and saying, I can't do this, and communicating to us that they are in trouble. And then, like I said, this is a little bit older, right? And from there, I will actually teach them that no, they can, and they will, and then they do. And it can be difficult for parents. Sometimes what we'll do is a different parent will bring. So sometimes, depending on which parent usually brings the
You'll
child,
bring
we'll
the dad.
switch. Sometimes dad will come instead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I was working, depending on the area, when we were working in Los Angeles, often a nanny would bring the child on that day,
Mm.
right? Because it can be very, very difficult for a parent to watch. That being said, what I've noticed is that when the parents are teaching their own children, when they've gone through the program, the virtual program, where they've learned all of the things that they need to know in order to do this practice safely for their own child, they feel a lot more secure in the practice itself because they know what they're looking for. They feel like they have the information, they have the knowledge. If you're a bystander watching this, it can be really scary, right? You may trust me and you may trust that I know what I'm doing, but that's still your child in the water and you're still not in control of the situation, which is scary. But
And
once
it's the
they're
mother instinct of, wanting to remove your child from a situation.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I do, for the most part, encourage parents to learn it if that's available to them, to learn it and teach it themselves, because the peace of mind that gives you, knowing that you know what you need to know to keep your child safe, and you know what to look for, and you know when to step in and when to allow them to grow their resilience. Because that's the
Mm-hmm.
thing. When we jump in too fast, we're cutting off their learning process. We're teaching them that someone's going to save them. That's not reality.
Hmm.
Reality is that we all have to learn to save ourselves. And we can hope that someone's close by, and we all do. But I want my child to be able to do it by himself. I want to know that he can do this by himself if nobody's around. And so being able to stand by and let it happen a little bit until it's no longer, no longer a possibility is really important, in
Yeah.
my opinion. Yeah.
I still remember for each my kids, well, the two older ones pretty much knew how to swim at the same time, but the last one, when she finally knew how to swim, I remember you know, the relief that I felt. I'm like, okay, so of all the dangers in life, I'm okay with this one. You know, but I'm going to be the devil's advocate a little here and ask you, by putting kids in that situation of, you know, really bringing them borderline to the panic and then teaching them, can it actually traumatize a kid or make a kid more scared of the water? Because I've seen kids at some swimming lessons that, you know, it's like panic attack to jump in the water, and then it ends up with the monitor pushing them in the water, and the kid is just like out of their mind, and there's like 2 feet of water, so I don't even think that the kid could drown, and we're all around. But you know, I was thinking when that was happening, like, you're scarring him for life. He's never going to want to touch water anymore. So how do you deal with not throwing them in a trauma, but bringing them far enough to learn? Does it make sense what I'm
It
saying?
absolutely makes sense. And I'm actually really glad you asked, because this is a really, really big part. And this is a question I get often. So, one of the things, the first thing is that we have to understand how trauma happens. So, trauma happens when a child thinks they are safe and everything is fine. And then all of a sudden, boom, things are not safe anymore.
Mm,
Um, it can absolutely be traumatizing for a child to learn to swim in an environment or with an instructor that does not have the correct tools and resources to help a child through fears. It can absolutely traumatize a child. I think that any child that is thrown into the water or pushed into the water without proper training beforehand. I do throw the children in the water, but they've got all their training behind them. They already know what to do. We've already done it, and we do it in such small steps that by the time you're seeing those big throws on the videos, I mean, they've been practicing this, you know? Um, the really important thing that I do that I think is so necessary, and I think that this is where parents do a much better job than the teenager instructor or the young 20s instructor at the local pool, is that we take the time to talk to our children,
mm,
right? We have the time and we take the time to talk to our children. Now, when I have a child in the water who is crying, I put the children underwater on the first day. Day one, their face is going in, they are getting dunked completely underwater. Sometimes they are crying and they're not happy about it. So how do I make sure that this becomes a positive experience rather than slides into worse, right? Part of it is creating really, really firm boundaries so that the child fully trusts that what I say is 100% true. So it starts with, I said this was going to happen and now it happened, right? But also with, you know, here's where the lesson ends, and then it does end there. And all of the buildup around that. So once the child can understand that what I say goes, the lesson will be done when I say it's done. We're going underwater 2 more times than we do, all of these things. They can then also understand that when I tell them that they're safe, they're going to trust it and they are safe, right? The other part is that we talk about it all, right? So when a child is crying, they're trying to communicate something to us. It's not manipulation. It's
mhm.
not, this is just the only way they know how to get across what it is they're trying to say. And so taking the time and the space to ask questions and get curious about what it is they're feeling and what their reality is in this moment is really, really important. So when a child comes to me crying, we're going to talk about it. I'm going to ask questions. What's going on for you? What are you feeling? Where do you feel that in your body? You know, we're going to take some deep breaths together and we're going to help calm the system. Now, we still are going to do the things that we said we were going to do, because that's the boundaries and the trust that we have to build in order to get to the scarier stuff later on, right? Because as much as it gets a little easier, it also gets a little bit harder sometimes. But that framework of asking questions about what their reality is and what they're feeling goes a very long way. And sometimes it's nothing, right? Sometimes it's what you would expect. But every once in a while, a child will say something so completely, I mean, they have the most amazing imaginations, right? And they don't have the framework for the world the way we do. And sometimes they'll say something so incredibly out of context that I would never have thought of, and then we can actually address it. And then it's no longer a problem. I had a child who refused to take baths, would freak out in the bath, but loved swimming. And the parent, we couldn't figure out why. And we finally sat down and talked to the child, and the child was afraid of the drain, saw the water swirl down the drain and thought they were going to swirl down with it.
Aw.
Never, as a parent, as an adult, we never would have thought of that, and never would have known, and would have fought with this child over and over and over to take a bath, when really they just had to have a conversation about how they didn't fit down the drain.
That's so cute. No,
Yeah.
and you're absolutely right. There's lots of time. I think that what we're lacking as adults or parents is the time and the patience to go through the whole explanation. There's kids that will tell you way faster. There's some that, will go through 56,000 detours, and then you're like, just say it. So, but yeah, no, I hear you, and it's amazing. So Selena, where can people reach you? And also, can you explain, like, the ones who don't have the privilege of training with you, how in person, I mean, how can they benefit from your, knowledge and expertise?
Yeah. So you can find me on just about every social media at Swim to Safety by Selena. It's just about everywhere the same one. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. And then the website is swimtosafety.com. And from there, we've got lots of resources, free downloads for keeping your children safe from the water, all that stuff. We teach in person in Montreal, Ottawa, Gatineau. And if you can't access me, and either because of location or because I'm full, which I wish I had more of me, but if you can't, you can still actually work with me, which is wonderful. As of 2021, you can work with me virtually. And so we have an online program where I train you to be the expert that you already are in your child, and expand that to water safety. I mean, we keep our children safe everywhere, right? We do it all the time. And this is the same thing. This is a helmet on a bike. It's a seatbelt in a car. And I give you all of the tools and everything you need. And then we support you all along the way. You have access to me and a community of parents who are doing this with their children as well. And we put the tools in your hands so that you can become the expert and know that your children are safe.
That's amazing. And that's what I was going to say. It probably also builds an amazing community of parents with all young kids, So it's like really a bonus to just walk in. And how many times as a young mom, I was just like, I wish I knew other moms that had, because my kids were not going to daycare. So anyway, Selena, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate your insights, and it's such an important subject. And with summer coming right around the corner, because here in Canada, we rarely swim in the winter. Well, some do, but that's really the ones who go out of their way. I mean, all of the others like me stay warm. But yeah, it's coming, and it's coming fast. And it's important to know what to do, especially if your kids are younger. And Selena is talking about the younger kids, but I'm also thinking about, I've seen kids of 7, 8, 12, 14 who never swam because they come from a place or a culture that did not really swim. So there's, and I think that for them, it's even harder to learn how to swim, but knowing how to swim is so important, and you can learn it at any age. And I fully support that. And reach out to Selena and follow her on social media. Selena, what would you like to leave people with? This one thing that you want to leave them with?
I guess a message to parents to trust themselves. We know when our kids are okay. I would tear up now. This is where I tear up. Okay. We know when our children are okay. We know when they're not. And we have this block as a culture, as a society around swimming and the water. And it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't. Parents everywhere can learn what they need to know, and they can keep their own children safer. And don't underestimate yourselves. As parents, we underestimate ourselves and what we're capable of doing. And let me tell you, it's not necessary. It's not necessary. So,
I love
uh,
it.
yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Carolyn. I'm going to add one tiny little thing, if I may, and that
Absolutely.
would be that, the other thing is that it doesn't have to take years, months, and years for your child to learn to swim. You know,
Mm,
our instructor-led lessons are 2 weeks, and we guarantee results. And the parents who are doing it themselves, depending on how often they're practicing, we have children who learn to swim in 2 days, 2 days from nothing. And most children within a month are swimming and self-rescuing on their own. So, not only do you need to hire someone else, you don't need to hire someone else, but you also don't need to wait. You don't need to wait. And you
no,
have the power to
exactly.
do it.
And
Yeah.
I think that the younger you do it, the more you develop the instinct.
The instinct, and frankly, it's such a wonderful bonding experience, right? When you can make that space for your child and learn how they manage fear and how they, I mean, it's just an incredible, incredible experience.
Yeah, I remember my son, my poor little son, he was so skinny, so skinny. He was a preemie. So by one, he was about 12 pounds. And I would bring, and I think we started at 9 months old to go in the water. He was blue. His lips and everything was blue. And he was just like shivering so much that eventually, we did a few months and then we stopped. I just thought I'm gonna let him gain some fat a bit and go back. But yes, it is I'm thinking about that because you said it's a precious bonding experience. And absolutely, I did it with all of my kids, and it is special, and they're looking forward to your time with them, and it's special. So anyway, I'm gonna stop reminiscing here. That's what happens when your kids are adults and you're like, oh my gosh, I miss those little babies or those little things. So thank you so much, Selena Willows, and reach out to her and to everyone who is here today. Thank you, and I'll see you next week. Bye, Selena.
Bye. Thank you, Carolyn.